Good morning, friends. As the sun works its way through the blinds and the kettle starts its small, hopeful song, let's take a soft breath together. Maybe you're listening with coffee in hand, sitting by a window, or still curled beneath a blanket, letting the day approach you at a gentle pace. Feel your shoulders drop, notice the hush between sounds, the fan's hum, a bird calling twice your own heartbeat, finding its rhythm. Here's a truth we rarely say out loud. You might not survive if you keep believing that sacrifice and love automatically return to you. Sometimes you can pour out years' savings and the best pieces of yourself and still be told you're not wanted at the table. So before you move into your day, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now set down whatever you've been carrying, let a fan hum, if you like a little white noise, and let's begin our morning's journey. The last time I put 8 candles on a cake, they were for my grandson. The cake was crooked, the frosting a little chaotic, and we laughed because chaos is how love looks when it's honest. This year, I put 78 candles on a cake for myself. I spaced them with the care you reserve for good china and delicate truths. I told myself the family would be over any minute. You learn after enough years how to say any minute, the way sailors say fair winds with faith and a little superstition. 6 o'clock became 7. I adjusted the napkins and reheated the pot roast. 7 drifted toward 8, and I found myself polishing a spoon that was already clean. The house sounded like it does in winter when the heat first coughs on stuttered embarrassed, pretending not to be lonely. I called my son Jonathan. Cheerfulness is a costume mothers put on even when the zipper sticks. "Sweetheart," I said, "are you all on your way?" Olivia answered. She didn't bother to shape the word hello. It came off her tongue like a paper cut. "We're at the airport, Helen, Cabo, family trip. You should reorganize your house or something. We'll catch you next week." The call ended with that little digital click that tells you someone has decided you're not worth their battery life. The silence in my kitchen wasn't empty. It was crowded with memories, all speaking at once. Jonathan at 6 asking for one more bedtime story. Olivia's first Thanksgiving when I scooted the fancy centerpiece aside so there would be room for the rolls she'd baked from a tube and called artisan. The twins' drawing still taped to my refrigerator, sons with too many rays and smiling stick people with names spelled phonetically. Perspective is the one luxury age gives for free. Here's my old woman wisdom for the morning. There are rejections that wound and rejections that clarify. This was the clarifying kind. I blew out the candles alone. Wax bled into icing like pale rivers, finding their way to an indifferent ocean. I cut a slice that could have fed a small choir and took one bite. Sugar butter and the faint grit of something unsaid. On instinct, I wrapped the rest in foil and slid it into the freezer. Call it hope or habit or just an old woman refusing to let a good cake go to waste. Odd fact of the day in ancient Athens, forgetting someone's birthday was thought to insult not just the person, but their household gods, like snubbing the spirit of a home. I looked around at my tidy dining room and thought, household gods, if you're here, you and I both deserved better. I made tea. Strong. The kind that promises a spine. Steam ribboned up and fogged my glasses, which was convenient because it gave me a moment to blink and blame the blur on physics rather than grief. I set the mug down and pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer. Paper is honest. It doesn't interrupt. It holds your contradictions without rolling its eyes. I drew 3 columns: what I gave, what I received, what I want. Under what I gave, my pen ran like a river, afterthought, preschool checks, orthodontist visits just until Friday, loans that forgot what Friday means, weekends of babysitting that quietly became whole summers, groceries delivered and left on porches with a text that said nothing more than a heart. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I wrote past the cramp, because muscles remember what minds try to deny. Under what I received, the list came slower. Thank yous that sounded like receipts, perfunctory stamped unread. Photos cropped just wide enough to imply I was there without proving it, and now the birthday phone call that treated my milestone as an inconvenience, a calendar error to be rectified by the delete key. The final column. What I want just stared at me. Wanting is easier at 20. At 78, it can feel like trespassing on a stranger's land. I waited. The kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled. The house settled the way houses do. A gentle reminder that even wood and plaster know how to exhale. Finally, I wrote quiet mornings that belong to me, friends whose promises don't expire, a life that doesn't require me to be useful in order to be loved. Then I did something I didn't plan. I reached for my phone not to call them again, but to turn it face down. A kindness to myself disguised as a small gesture. Humor has always been my shock absorber, so I let a few jokes tumble through as I cleared plates I'd set for ghosts. If martyrdom burned calories, I could pose for a fitness magazine. If love languages had a dialect for wire transfer, we'd be fluent. If family emergency were a loyalty program, I'd have elite status and lounge access. I rinsed the plates and let them air dry. Paper towels are for spills. Some messes need air. On the refrigerator, a construction paper sun smiled at me with 12 bright rays. I thought about the twins, about how small they were, the last time they fell asleep on my couch with spaghetti sauce like war paint across their cheeks. Children don't choose the scripts their parents hand them. That thought softened me, then sharpened me again. Love for them didn't mean erasing myself. Curiosity finally nudged me toward the living room. On the couch, tucked down between cushions like a secret, lay a tablet, the older model Jonathan uses. It buzzed once, lit up, offered no passcode because habit is lazy. I hesitated. Then I didn't. If life hands you a hinge, you see if the door swings. Photos spilled out. Olivia clinking a glass of something that cost too much to spell. Jonathan grinning behind sunglasses big enough to make a confession anonymous. The kids in matching swimsuits whose tags cost more than my monthly water bill. Captions bragging about grind discipline earning it. My mouth went dry, not from envy, but from recognition. I'd seen these receipts before, just in a different ledger. More messages. A group chat called Village All Cheerleading and Curated Empathy. Someone typed, "If Helen really loved the kids, she'd stop making everything about money." I laughed one bright, startled sound in an otherwise obedient room. If love weren't about money, then what exactly had my savings been buying all these years? I set the tablet down like a hot plate and returned to my list. I added one clean word to the margin, a label that fit better than any euphemism I tried: exploitation. There's relief in naming the thing that's been chewing your edges. Once you see its shape, you can stop feeding it. Outside, the first bus of the morning sighed past my house, and a dog barked twice as if to second the motion. Dawn had climbed into the day while I wasn't looking. It felt like permission. I folded the legal pad closed and pressed my palm to the cover, a small oath signed in skin I would act, not plead. I would choose, not wait. Before I cleared the candles, I lit one more, just one, and let it burn long enough to scent the air with vanilla and second chances. Then I blew it out and watched the smoke lift, curl, and disappear the way old habits do when you finally let a window open. The morning after, I woke to a house that sounded foreign. Too quiet, too deliberate, as though the walls themselves were waiting for me to make the next move. I brewed coffee, the dark kind that smells like bravery, and sat at the table with my yellow legal pad. The 3 columns stared back what I gave, what I received, what I want. The ink had dried, but the ache behind the words still pulsed. I thought about Thomas, my late husband, how he used to tell me, "Helen, you always carry too much. Even a mule has a limit." Back then, I'd laugh and brush it off as though love were measured by the pounds of burden one could haul. But sitting there at 78, I realized he had been right all along. The tablet still sat on the counter, half-charged, humming like an accomplice. Against my better judgment, or maybe because judgment had been ignored for too long, I opened it again. More photos, more captions, more curated lies. Vacations in Cabo, shopping trips that sparkled with brand names, dinners where the bill could pay my electric for 6 months. And in every smiling face, I saw my bank transfers, my pension, my quiet sacrifices disguised as their success. Odd fact of the day, the world's oldest surviving ledger was found in Mesopotamia, recording barley and beer. Even then, people knew that what you give and what you get had to balance or collapse followed. Collapse had already arrived. I spent the afternoon cleaning, not the performative kind of cleaning you do before company comes, but the kind that feels like an exorcism. I boxed up party supplies, sorted photo albums, and set aside the few keepsakes that mattered. Everything else could go. As evening fell, I called a realtor. Her name was Denise Voice, brisk but kind. "Mrs. Mercer, the market is strong. If you're serious, I can come tomorrow." "I'm serious," I said, and meant it. That night, I ate leftover cake alone, fork scraping porcelain. It didn't taste like sugar anymore. It tasted like resolve. Denise arrived the next morning in a navy blazer and sensible shoes, carrying a leather folder that looked like it had brokered hundreds of goodbyes. She stepped into my house, scanned the crown molding the hardwood floors, the light spilling through the kitchen window, and nodded approvingly. "This will go fast, Mrs. Mercer," she said. I trailed behind as she moved from room to room. Each space had its memories: Jonathan building Lego castles on the living room rug, Sophie's tiny handprints smeared across the sliding door, Caleb falling asleep on the couch with spaghetti on his cheeks. I touched the banister as if to reassure the wood, whispering silent thanks. This wasn't grief, it was ceremony. Odd fact of the day. In some native traditions, when leaving a dwelling, you thank the walls for holding you the roof, for covering you the floor, for carrying your steps. I wasn't burning sage, but I was offering gratitude in my own quiet way. By evening, the house was listed. By the next morning, 3 offers were already on the table. Cash buyers, families eager for roots, investors sniffing equity like bloodhounds. I told Denise to choose a family who wanted to live there, not just flip it for profit. Call me sentimental, but I wanted these walls to hear bedtime stories again, not market forecasts. 2 weeks later, I signed the closing documents. My pen didn't tremble. The notary stamped the final page, and just like that, my decades-long chapter ended with a single exhalation of ink. When I walked out for the last time, I didn't look back. Not out of coldness, but because some doors are meant to shut firmly like punctuation at the end of a sentence. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine in my new apartment, raised it toward the quiet walls, and whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time in years, the word didn't mean obligation. It meant release. They came back on a Thursday evening, fresh from Cabo, still sunburned and smug. I wasn't there to see it, but Denise texted me one perfect line. They tried the key. Didn't fit. I could picture it. The suitcases wheeled up the driveway, Olivia with her designer tote slung over one shoulder. Jonathan fumbling at the lock like a man who thought the world owed him access. The pause. The dawning realization. The sharp hiss of Olivia's voice. "What do you mean it doesn't open?" An hour later, my phone lit up. Jonathan's name. Then again. Then a string of texts in capital letters, "Mom, what did you do? How could you?" I set the phone face down and made myself tea. Not every bell must be answered. The next morning, a knock rattled my new apartment door. I opened it to find Jonathan, red-faced, Olivia, sharp as vinegar beside him. "You sold the house," Jonathan blurted. "I did," I said, voice steady. Olivia jabbed a finger. "You can't just throw your family into the street." "Correction," I replied. "I didn't throw you out. I sold a house that was legally mine. The new owners aren't interested in subsidizing freeloaders." Odd fact of the day, the word freeloader first appeared in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Too many mouths, too few wallets. My wallet had been theirs for too long. Jonathan rubbed his temples. "We have nowhere to go. The kids will be fine," I cut in. "Children survive small houses. What they can't survive is parents who confuse entitlement with love." Olivia's eyes sparked. "We'll sue. This is elder abuse by you against us." I almost laughed. "My lawyer would love to meet you. Bring your evidence. Bring your conscience too, if you can find it." They left in a whirl of fury and exhaust fumes. I closed the door, leaned against it, and whispered to myself, "Boundaries sound a lot like peace." It didn't take long for Olivia to shift battlegrounds. 3 days later, a Facebook post appeared, her specialty. A photo of Caleb and Sophie looking pitiful on a couch I didn't recognize, captioned, "Please pray for us. My mother-in-law sold our home and abandoned her grandchildren. We don't know where to turn." The comments poured in. Some clutched their pearls, typing platitudes about forgiveness. Others, blessed them, remembered reality. One neighbor wrote, "Funny, I saw Helen mowing their lawn last summer while Olivia was sunning by the pool." Another chimed in, "Didn't Helen buy those twins school supplies every year?" Odd fact of the day, the word scandal comes from the Greek skandalon, meaning stumbling block. Olivia thought she was laying one in my path. Turns out she tripped on it herself. I didn't engage. Silence is sometimes the sharpest blade. Meanwhile, Jonathan's voice messages grew more frantic. "Mom, please. We can't afford this rental. Vanessa." He always said her name like it was scripture says. "You've destroyed us. What do we tell the kids?" I listened, deleted, and went back to watering my balcony plants. Peace, like geraniums, thrives best when tended daily. Helen from down the hall stopped by with banana bread. She winked. "Don't worry, hon. People around here know who you are." Olivia's halo slipping fast. We laughed until my sides ached. Humor, I've learned, is the only seasoning that makes bitterness edible. That night I wrote in my notebook, "They are unraveling, not me." And it felt true. For once, the center of gravity wasn't in their chaos, it was in my quiet. Odd fact, second course in medieval courts, silence was considered an admission of wisdom, not guilt. I like that. I decided to keep practicing. Weeks passed. Word spread that Olivia had moved in with her sister 2 towns over, leaving Jonathan and the children in a rental that smelled of mildew and resignation. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt something sturdier distance. Then came the knock. A woman in a navy skirt suit, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm with Child Services. We received an anonymous call regarding your grandchildren." I invited her in, poured tea, answered questions with the calm precision of someone who has nothing to hide. Yes, I loved Caleb and Sophie. Yes, I wanted them safe. But no, I wasn't their wallet or their maid. She nodded, took notes, and left. I didn't need a detective to know who had dialed that number. Odd fact of the day in poker, there's a move called a bluff catch. You don't need a strong hand, you just need to know your opponent is lying. That visit was Olivia's bluff, and I caught it clean. I called my lawyer, Stephen Harris. He sighed. "Classic tactic. Fortunately, your records are impeccable. Keep documenting. If she escalates, we'll counter. That night, I opened the cedar box in my closet, the one that smelled faintly of cedar oil and thyme. Beneath folded photographs and brittle birthday cards, I found the letter Thomas had written years before he died. Helen, it read, "You've always been the anchor. But anchors aren't meant to drag forever. When I'm gone, don't spend your days chained to everyone else. Cut the rope. Live freely." I pressed the paper to my chest. The tears that came weren't heavy. They were cleansing like rain washing grit from windows. I copied one line into my notebook, "Live freely, Helen." Then I underlined it twice. And for the first time in years, I believed I could. The letter from Thomas became my compass. I carried it folded in my purse like a relic, taking it out when doubt whispered in the quiet hours. His words steadied me, reminded me that love wasn't meant to be indentured service. That week, I went back to the community center. On Wednesdays, a circle of women gathered in a sunny room smelling faintly of lemon polish and coffee grounds. Most were grandmothers, some widows, all with stories that bent eerily close to mine. Alice, white hair in a braid down her back, admitted her son had drained her retirement with just one more loan. Gloria, younger than me but already weathered, was racing her granddaughter because her daughter had vanished into pills. Another woman chuckled bitterly that she'd been supporting her grown daughter for 30 years, rent cars, even pets. We weren't victims, we were veterans. When it was my turn, I read aloud Thomas's line, "Live freely, Helen." The room hushed. Then Gloria reached over, squeezed my hand, and said, "That's the sermon I needed this week." Odd fact of the day, sunflowers don't just turn to the sun. On cloudy days, they turn to each other, borrowing light until the sky's clear. That's what we were, sunflowers in a storm. Meanwhile, Olivia's online campaign lost its shine. Neighbors who knew the truth, who'd seen me mowing their lawn, dropping off groceries, spoke up. Her halo dimmed. Jonathan looked thinner when I saw him outside the grocery store. He shuffled, avoided my eyes, then muttered, "The kids miss you. Could you at least have them over for dinner?" I agreed on one condition. Dinner with them, Jonathan. Not with you and Olivia. He nodded, almost grateful. That Saturday, Caleb and Sophie came. They barreled into my arms, smelling of playground dust and cheap shampoo. We ate spaghetti, laughed over Uno, and for one night my apartment echoed with unpolished, authentic joy. After they left, I wrote in my notebook, "Family can be chosen even inside your own bloodline." Summer pressed down heavy, the kind of heat that makes you swear off turning on the oven and live on iced tea. I kept my blinds half closed, the fan whirring like a tired old friend. That's when Helen from down the hall convinced me to join her at the community center's creative afternoons. "Paint, crochet, clay, whatever keeps you from yelling at the news," she said. So I painted. Not well, my first canvas looked like a tomato had exploded on a swimming pool, but it was mine. Each brushstroke reminded me, this space was mine, these hours were mine. I didn't have to earn them with babysitting receipts or emergency wire transfers. Odd fact of the day, Winston Churchill took up painting in his 40s as therapy for depression. If it worked for a prime minister with the weight of a world war, it could certainly work for a grandmother with the weight of overdue gratitude. Meanwhile, Olivia tried one last trick. A text from an unknown number. The children don't understand why their grandma abandoned them. Couldn't you wait until after school to ruin their lives? Delete. No reply. Abandonment is when you stop loving someone. I hadn't stopped loving Caleb and Sophie. I'd only stopped funding poor choices. Then one afternoon, I spotted Jonathan waiting outside my apartment. He looked worn down, shoulders sagging, a man stripped of the bravado Olivia used to dress him in. His voice cracked. "Mom, she's gone. Olivia moved in with her sister. She says she's done with us." I opened the door and poured him a glass of water. He stared at it like it held answers. Sometimes I said gently, "The best gift someone gives you is leaving." He managed a weak laugh. And in that moment, I knew the unraveling wasn't mine anymore. It was his. By the time the first leaves started to bronze, Jonathan had settled into a smaller rhythm of life. The grand house with granite countertops was gone. Now he and the children lived in a rental with peeling linoleum and a yard barely big enough for a grill. But on their refrigerator, instead of souvenir magnets, there were drawings, crayon rockets, lopsided cats, stick figure families with names spelled phonetically. For the first time in years, their life looked real, not staged. I sat at the kitchen table with him one evening, sipping tea. He leaned forward, elbows on the worn formica. "Mom," he said, "I didn't realize how much I depended on you until it stopped. I just assumed you'd always catch us." I stirred my tea slowly. "That's the trouble with nets, Jonathan. They're meant to catch someone falling, not to carry them every single day." He looked away, ashamed. "Olivia said you were manipulating us." And I believed her because it was easier than admitting I was failing. I let silence hang. Sometimes silence speaks clearer than sermons. Then I said, "I'm not interested in blame anymore. I'm interested in boundaries. If you want me in your life, it will be as your mother, not your bank, not your backup plan, just your mother." He nodded slowly this time, as though letting the words settle. "I want that." Odd fact of the day: butterflies retain memories from when they were caterpillars. Transformation doesn't erase what came before, it just reshapes it with wings. Jonathan was still Jonathan, but maybe he was finally remembering who he'd been before entitlement cocooned him. Then Caleb burst in, waving a math test with a bright red A, Sophie, right behind with a library book clutched to her chest. They tumbled into me, their laughter spilling across that shabby rental kitchen. And in their joy, I saw the blueprint of something worth rebuilding. The weeks that followed were stitched together by smaller, humbler patterns. Jonathan called twice a week, not with demands, but with updates. "Mom, I cooked chili tonight. The kids ate it without gagging." Or Sophie finished her book report early. These weren't emergencies. They were ordinary threads, and ordinary threads hold stronger than grand gestures. One Saturday, I had them all over. Caleb helped me stir sauce in the kitchen, splattering the stovetop until it looked like abstract art. Sophie set the table, meticulously aligning forks and napkins like a tiny general. Jonathan carried bread from the bakery, his contribution dense enough to double as a weapon, but still appreciated. Over dinner, he cleared his throat. "Mom, I need to say this. I'm sorry for letting it go on so long, for listening to Olivia instead of you, for taking advantage of your kindness." I looked at him carefully. Regret lived on his face, but so did something new: honesty. "I accept your apology," I said, "but we're not going back. No rewinding. If you want me in your life, it has to be forward. Respect honesty. No more rescues." He nodded. "Forward it is." Odd fact of the day in architecture: the keystone is the stone at the top of an arch, the one that keeps the whole thing from collapsing. For years, I thought money was the keystone in our family, but tonight, with spaghetti sauce cooling and laughter echoing, I realized the keystone was truth. We raised our glasses, watermilk, nothing glamorous, and clinked them together. Sophie giggled at the sound. Caleb declared me the Uno champion of the evening. I didn't cheat this time, but I let him think I did. Later, after they left, I wrote in my notebook, "Repair, not rewind." And the words didn't feel like theory anymore. They felt like practice. By winter, my days moved with a rhythm that finally felt like mine. Mornings I painted at the little desk by the window, messy swirls of color that didn't have to please anyone but me. Afternoons, I walked to the community center where the circle of women shared stories that fit together like patchwork quilts. Alice, with her drained retirement, Gloria, raising her granddaughter, another Helen, learning TikTok dances, and pulling muscles she didn't know she had. Evenings sometimes, Caleb and Sophie sprawled on my rug with homework pencils, scratching laughter, rising when one of them accidentally dropped an eraser down the other's shirt. Jonathan came by too, but not to lean. He brought bread again, less like a brick this time. He called me after shifts just to say, "Good night, Mom." It was strange after so many years of him arriving with empty hands and endless requests to have him offer something small but genuine. Odd fact of the day, elephants revisit the bones of their dead, gently touching them with their trunks. Scientists believe it's their way of remembering. Our little community circle felt like that, women returning to old hurts, not to wallow, but to honor what was lost and carry it forward differently. One snowy evening, Helen from down the hall and I spread maps across my table. We circled Florence, Venice, Tuscany, giggling like schoolgirls. Italy wasn't a someday dream anymore. It had dates penciled in, reservations half made. A plan with legs. That night, after everyone had gone home and the snow still pressed softly against the window, I wrote in my notebook, "Joy doesn't have to be spectacular. Ordinary joy is enough." And I believed it. Completely. The new year opened crisp and bright mornings edged with frost and skies the color of porcelain. On my balcony, pansies bloomed stubbornly in their pot little bursts of defiance against winter. I liked them for that. They didn't need to be roses. They didn't need applause. They just bloomed quietly on their own terms. Jonathan brought the children over on a Sunday afternoon. Caleb bounded through the door first, waving a science project he could barely carry, while Sophie hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might protest. Jonathan lingered at the threshold until I beckoned him in. "Mom," he said, settling into the armchair, "I know we can't erase what's happened, but I'd like to keep moving forward if you'll let me." I studied his face, lined, humbled, finally honest. "Forward is fine," I said, "but understand no rescues. Respect truth and boundaries. That's the only way." He nodded. "I get it. I want that too." Odd fact of the day, butterflies remember their caterpillar lives. Transformation doesn't erase the past, it reshapes, it carries it into flight. That's what we were doing, not forgetting, not pretending, transforming. As the children sprawled on my rug, laughter spilling out, as they argued over whose tower of blocks was taller, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Olivia's shadow no longer haunted our story. She had written herself out, and I had no desire to scribble her back in. That night, after they'd left and the apartment settled into its soft evening hush, I wrote my last line in the yellow legal pad. Peace is not the absence of noise. It's the presence of choice. I closed the notebook, looked out over the city lights, and whispered to myself, "This is mine." And for the first time in decades, I felt not just free, but whole. At 78, Helen Mercer prepares for a birthday dinner only to be abandoned. Her son Jonathan and daughter-in-law Olivia are vacationing in Cabo, dismissing her with a cutting phone call. When Helen finds Jonathan's forgotten tablet, she discovers years of financial exploitation, lavish vacations, shopping, and hard work. Captions all bankrolled by her quiet sacrifices. Determined to reclaim her life, Helen creates a list of what I gave, what I received, what I want. The balance is unbearable. She sells her home while they are away, closing decades of obligation with a stroke of her pen. When Jonathan and Olivia return, they're locked out. Furious confrontations follow, with Olivia attempting to smear Helen online and even involving child services, but Helen's careful documentation and her lawyer protect her. Helen leans on a circle of women at the community center who share similar scars. A letter from her late husband urging her to live freely strengthens her resolve. Slowly, her world expands beyond survival, painting friendships and planning a long dreamed-of trip to Italy. Meanwhile, Olivia leaves. Jonathan and the children struggle in a smaller rental stripped of luxury but finally real. Over time, Jonathan recognizes his failures and apologizes sincerely. Helen accepts, but with firm boundaries: no more rescues, no more secrets, only respect. Her relationship with Caleb and Sophie flourishes in this new arrangement. Their visits fill her apartment with laughter, while her own days become bright with ordinary joy. She learns that peace doesn't come from silence or sacrifice, it comes from choice. The story closes with Helen watching city lights, notebook closed, whispering, "This is mine." She has transformed not by forgetting, but by carrying her past forward into freedom. For the first time, she feels not just free, but whole.